What if I told you that one of the coldest places in America once had a cabin where a man could sit through a brutal winter night without a modern furnace, and then survive a scorching summer without air conditioning? Sounds impossible, right? But deep in the mountains, where winter winds could tear through the trees, and snow could bury a cabin almost overnight, one mountain man discovered something that changed the way he lived. His cabin had no modern insulation, no electric heater, no air conditioner, no smart thermostat, and yet, according to the old principles behind its design, the cabin could stay noticeably more comfortable through extreme seasonal changes. But here's the part that makes this story truly fascinating. The secret wasn't the fireplace, it wasn't the wood, and it wasn't some mysterious material hidden inside the walls. The real secret was something most people walked straight past without ever noticing: the mountain itself. This man had figured out how to make the land, the trees, the sunlight, the soil, and even the movement of air work together. And he didn't learn it from an engineering textbook. He learned it the hard way. Imagine waking up before sunrise in the middle of winter. Outside, the temperature has plunged below freezing. The wind is screaming through the forest. Snow is covering the ground, and there is no store nearby, no emergency service, and no modern heating system waiting to save you. If your cabin loses its heat, you don't just become uncomfortable. You could be in serious danger. Now imagine the opposite. Months later, summer arrives. The same cabin is surrounded by blazing sunlight. The air outside becomes heavy and suffocating. Yet inside, the mountain man's shelter remains shaded and surprisingly cool. How? The answer is hidden in a handful of simple decisions that most modern homeowners would never think about. Where he built the cabin, which direction he faced it, how he used trees for shade, how he positioned openings for airflow, how he interacted with the ground beneath the structure, and how he designed the walls to slow the movement of heat. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. The mountain man didn't have to understand words like thermal mass, passive cooling, or heat transfer. He simply paid attention. He watched where the snow disappeared first. He watched where the wind became strongest. He noticed which parts of the mountain stayed protected. He observed how sunlight moved across the forest, and every observation became another piece of the puzzle. Eventually, he created something far more clever than a simple wooden shelter. He created a cabin that worked with nature instead of constantly fighting against it. And there's one particular principle behind this old-fashioned approach that could completely change the way you think about keeping a home cool in summer and warm in winter. It sounds almost too simple, but once you understand it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. So stay with me until the end, because we're going to break down exactly how this mountain man's cabin used the land, sunlight, airflow, and natural materials to control temperature, and why some of these ideas are still relevant today. And if you're fascinated by forgotten survival knowledge, old mountain cabins, homesteading, traditional building techniques, and the secrets our ancestors learned from nature, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Ethan Cross. And before we continue, I want to know something. Where are you watching this video from? Drop your city and country in the comments. Let's see how many different places are joining us for this story. Because the deeper we go into this cabin's design, the more you'll realize that the mountain man wasn't simply building a shelter. He was building a system. And the strangest part? The most important part of that system was hiding beneath his feet. Imagine stepping inside a small mountain cabin on a scorching summer afternoon and feeling something strange. Outside, the air is hot. The sun is beating down. The forest is dry and still, but inside the cabin, it feels cool. Then winter arrives. Snow covers the roof, icy wind cuts through the trees, and temperatures drop far below freezing. Yet somehow, that same little cabin stays surprisingly warm. No air conditioner, no furnace, no modern insulation system, just a simple idea that one mountain man understood better than most people ever did. His secret wasn't a machine. It wasn't expensive technology, and it wasn't some complicated construction technique. It was the way he worked with the mountain itself. For generations, people living in remote mountain regions had to understand something modern homeowners often forget. A house doesn't simply have to fight the weather. If it's designed correctly, it can use the environment to protect the people inside. And this mountain man's cabin was built around exactly that principle. The first clue was its location. Instead of building the cabin directly on an exposed ridge, where winter winds could hit the walls from every direction, he chose a sheltered position. The cabin sat near the natural protection of the land, using the mountain slope, trees, and surrounding terrain as a barrier against harsh weather. That decision mattered more than it seemed. In winter, cold air and powerful winds can steal heat from a building incredibly quickly. Every crack, exposed wall, and poorly positioned window becomes another opportunity for warmth to escape. But the mountain man understood that the best insulation sometimes starts before you even build the walls. He let the landscape do part of the work. The thick forest reduced the impact of wind. The slope provided protection, and the earth surrounding the cabin helped create a more stable environment than the open air outside. But that was only part of his secret. The real trick was underneath the cabin. Rather than treating the ground as an enemy, he understood that soil temperatures change much more slowly than air temperatures. Think about what happens outside. In summer, the air temperature can rise dramatically during the day. But several feet beneath the surface, the ground remains much more stable. In winter, the opposite happens. While the air above the ground becomes bitterly cold, the earth below can remain considerably warmer than the freezing air. That meant the mountain man could use the ground as a natural temperature buffer. His cabin wasn't simply sitting on the mountain, it was connected to it, and that simple idea could make an enormous difference. The cabin's design also helped control sunlight. During winter, sunlight was valuable. Even weak sunlight entering through strategically placed openings could add warmth to the interior. But during summer, direct sunlight could turn a small wooden cabin into an oven. So the mountain man used something incredibly simple: shade. Overhanging trees, roof extensions, carefully positioned windows, and natural vegetation could block the strongest summer sunlight while still allowing useful winter light to reach the cabin. Modern homes often spend thousands of dollars trying to recreate effects that people living in the wilderness learned through observation. But there was another critical part of the system: the walls. A mountain cabin couldn't depend on thin boards alone. Wood itself provides some insulation, but traditional builders often understood that thicker walls and layers of natural materials could slow down the movement of heat, instead of allowing indoor heat to rush outside in winter. The walls acted as a barrier, and in summer, those same heavy materials slowed the transfer of outdoor heat into the cabin. This is where the idea of thermal mass becomes important. Materials such as stone, earth, and dense wood can absorb and release heat more slowly than lightweight surfaces. During the hottest part of the day, these materials can delay the movement of heat. Then, when temperatures drop at night, the stored heat can gradually move back into the environment. The result is not magic, it's physics, and the mountain man didn't need to know the scientific terminology to understand what was happening. He learned by living through it. Every winter taught him something. Every summer gave him another lesson. He noticed which side of the mountain stayed warmer. He noticed where snow melted first. He noticed where the wind hit hardest. He noticed where trees protected the ground. And eventually, he learned to build according to those observations. Perhaps the most impressive part was ventilation. You might think keeping a cabin warm means sealing it completely, but that's not always the answer. A cabin needs controlled airflow. In summer, warm air rises. If a building has openings positioned correctly, hot air can escape through higher points, while cooler air enters from lower openings. This natural movement of air is known as the stack effect. The mountain man may not have called it that, but he understood the result. Open the right openings at the right time, and the cabin could breathe. Closest them when the cold arrived, and the heat could stay inside. The same cabin could behave differently depending on the season. That was the real secret. It wasn't one magical trick. It was a system. Molakshan Okershan shade, ventilation, thick walls, natural materials, and the thermal stability of the earth. Together, these simple ideas created something surprisingly effective. And there's an important lesson here for anyone interested in old cabins, mountain living, homesteading, traditional building techniques, or passive house design. The smartest solution isn't always the most complicated one. Sometimes it's simply understanding how nature already works. Modern technology gives us incredible tools. We can heat entire buildings with the push of a button and cool rooms with powerful air conditioners. But those systems consume energy. Traditional mountain builders had fewer options. That limitation forced them to become extremely observant. They couldn't afford to waste heat. They couldn't afford to ignore the wind. They couldn't simply increase the thermostat when temperatures dropped. Their buildings had to work with the environment. And that's why this old mountain cabin trick remains so fascinating today. Because the secret wasn't really about keeping a cabin warm. It was about slowing down the transfer of heat, In winter, you want to keep the warmth you've created. In summer, you want to keep the heat outside. The cabin's design simply made that process easier. And perhaps that's why these old mountain structures can teach us something modern houses sometimes forget. Comfort begins with design. Before the first fire was lit, before the first blanket was pulled across the bed, and before the first winter storm arrived, the mountain man had already prepared for the weather. He didn't defeat nature. He positioned his cabin so nature would help him, and that may have been the smartest trick of all. So the next time you see an old cabin tucked beneath towering trees, or built against a mountain slope, don't assume its location was chosen randomly. Look closer. The angle of the roof, the thickness of the walls, the position of the windows, the surrounding trees, the relationship between the cabin and the ground. Every detail may have had a purpose, because long before modern insulation systems and smart thermostats, people were already solving one of the hardest problems in home design. How do you stay comfortable when the weather outside wants you to do the opposite? The answer, as this mountain man's cabin proved, may have been hiding in plain sight. You don't always need to fight the mountain. Sometimes you just need to build with it.